Welcome to another edition of the Building Your Career podcast. Today, I'm joined by Bex Porter, who has got a very exciting story to share with us, which is all about either projects or policy or career, which is focused on net zero and a few other interesting topics as well. So I am genuinely really excited about this one. We can be going off in a few tangents here and there. But Bex, I suppose, could you just give us a little bit of a brief introduction of who you are, and then we'll get cracking right from the beginning of your career?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dom. And thanks for having me. And to Lizzie, one of your previous guests, for suggesting that you get in touch with me. So Bex Porter, I'm currently an associate within our sort of buildings group within Arup. Arup are a multidisciplinary engineering and consulting firm that exist globally, but we have a really strong presence in the UK with our headquarters in London. I'm a chartered structural engineer and chartered civil engineer, and that was my entry to Arup as a graduate. And I guess now focus more on how we can use that real technical expertise that comes with an engineering background to give really credible advice and support to our clients who are looking, I guess, broadly at sustainability, whether that's decarbonisation, resilience, retrofit, but where that's really part of their agenda or trying to get it to be part of their agenda, if you like.
And I think it's a topic with so many different aspects of the sustainability topic. So it would be great to kind of rewind it and take it all the way back to the start of your career and just to see how that's evolved in terms of your knowledge and the industry in general as a whole, how that's kind of evolved through the years, really. So could you kind of take us back to the beginning and tell us how you kind of got involved in the sustainability?
Sure. Rack my memory, but yeah, I guess the journey for me was I started out as a graduate structural engineer, very much focused on getting all of that technical learning under your belt that you need in the really early days of your career. And one of the early projects that I worked on was a timber scheme. So using mass timber, cross-laminated timber slabs with glulam frame. And I think just inherently through looking at a timber design, the team understood that there was a reduction in embodied carbon here, that we were using a sustainable material, and what did that actually mean? So I guess my entry into the sustainability world was through looking at the materials. Okay, so what is the embodied carbon of this material, and why does that differ from, a different frame option, for example, for the same building? And a few of those early projects that I worked on, we just had a really engaged design team across the various disciplines within Arup, and a really encouraging kind of leader or project manager to say, yeah, let's work out the embodied carbon of our options at stage 2. Let's, put that on the client's radar and make sure they're aware that, yes, all of these different decisions can impact floor to ceiling height, cost, span, but they also impact carbon. And so I guess just started to speak that language in the very early days of my career as a structural engineer. And then as that's evolved, I've always, been a big advocate for the importance of relationships and influence and those, I don't like the term, but softer skills that are actually not soft, they're really hard, but the importance of how we articulate engineering concepts or proposals to a client or to a wider audience. And so some of my work started to move into that kind of partnership building type space. And then in 2021, I undertook a secondment out of Arup to the UN High-Level Climate Champions as their built environment sector lead. Now, the climate champions are appointed by each host government of the COPs, the Conference of the Parties, that happen every year, which is all about meeting the aims of the Paris Agreement. And I worked as a built environment sector specialist in that multi-sector team. So that really made me zoom out from, okay, as an engineer, we're typically looking at one building at a time. It might be a master plan, or it might be, a pocket, a cluster of assets. But this was at global scale, what is the impact of our sector, and how do we try and drive convergence in a sector that is really, really fragmented, really, really outdated, to be honest, in a lot of parts of the sector,
Mhm.
but is so critical. So that was a really amazing experience, learned a hell of a lot in a short amount of time. And now I'm back in the business and I guess coming at our projects with that systems strategic lens of how we can really add most value and get the best impact on our projects. I hope that's
Yeah,
explained it
yeah,
somewhat.
yeah, definitely. I think you touched on an important point there in terms of the communication side of things as well, because I went to an event by the Engineers Reuse Collective, and there was a guest speaker there from a main contractor, and it was about the communication because they were saying it's about the communication from the consultants and the engineers in order to be able to inform the contractor why the sustainability would be important. So I suppose you've kind of seen it from both sides really, where you've seen it from the company perspective and then also seen it from a kind of almost like a global perspective, really. So, what kind of advice would you give to people who are maybe at the company perspective at the moment and really want to develop their communication skills to be able to better inform
Mhm.
their kind of clients or the contractors that sustainability should be a topic that should be taken seriously and kind of at the forefront of the design, really?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the challenge that comes particularly with our sector is that it's a different answer for every single client or every single building, right? Or every single government, for example. But there's always an entry point to sustainability, I think, that sometimes we just have to step into the shoes of that person that we're trying to encourage or influence or change their mind and think, okay, well, what is their entry point? So sustainability can mean lots of things, and actually telling someone they're going to reduce their carbon emissions, which is part of their scope 3, which is part of this commitment, sometimes that's not going to land. But if you talk about clean air for children walking to school in their local community, or if you talk about resilience to the impacts of climate change, the weather events that we're seeing now, this isn't an abstract concept anymore. I do think there's always that entry point, and it's important to understand where other people are coming from. It's
Hmm.
important to understand if cost is their real driver. It's important to understand if timescale is their real driver, because they need to get something online by a certain point. Everyone has, something that is important to them, but there will be a
Yeah.
sustainability entry point to that. I think the thing that we can forget as engineers is everything we're doing is, well, not forget, but sometimes we could overlook the fact that everything we're doing is for humans, right? Yes, we love architecture. Yes, we love buildings. Yes, we love the visual of that. But actually, if that building doesn't function for the person that it's designed for, then it's a failed project, really. Buildings are the only asset class that run across all society. That's where we go to get healthcare, when we're not well. It's the buildings that house our elderly relatives, where our children go to school, where we're really proud of because it's our home. And that's across the globe and across all aspects of society. So I think there's a real opportunity for the sector to speak better about the impact that we have.
Hmm.
Buildings are so critical, and they are also responsible for a third of global emissions. So
Hmm.
the challenge is that teams look at them one by one, typically. Large portfolio holders in the commercial sector, large housing owners, that's slightly different. But there's so much individuality in how we develop and operate buildings that it's sometimes hard, I think, for engineers to realize the scale of the impact. So I think the more we can communicate those different entry points, communicate the why is this important, to influence the brief, the client, the employer's requirements, all of that good contractual stuff, then it will trickle through the design team because everyone will have their entry point and get on board. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but it is really, really important.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And I think it's all about asking the right questions at the beginning as well to find what is important to the individual person, because there's different ways of communicating the same point of view or the same topic, but it's all about, I think the skill really is in the reframe of
Yeah.
communicating the topic in a certain way that would appeal to the person's nature or what their interests are. And the only way of finding that out is to actually ask the questions at the beginning to build that relationship from the start, really. Because the last thing you want to do is for it to get all the way through the design of the project, and all of a sudden it's a last minute afterthought, really. It should be embedded in from this project
And
right
I've
at the very
I've
beginning.
seen projects that are, say, for example, a decarbonisation strategy across multiple assets, all owned by a single client. And the output is 4 different reports, one for the sustainability team, one for the estates team, one for the finance team, because they do want to look at different things, and that's okay. But the key is that the credibility, the analysis, the potential interventions is all the same, obviously, across the board. But it's that, as you say, it's that communication style to say how we frame it is important to you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was quite keen as well because I know we talked about some kind of maybe projects that you'd worked on as examples of kind of standout projects, really. Could you give us a little bit of an understanding as some of the types of projects that you've worked on that have been innovative in their kind of sustainability approach?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned timber at the beginning of the conversation. One project that I worked on when I was based in our London office was the Sky Health and Fitness Centre. So for the Sky, the broadcaster, for their campus in West London, they needed a health and fitness centre for their staff, ultimately. And it was with DRMM architects based in London, who are pioneers really with cross-laminated timber. And we developed a gym for them. So one of the challenges as a structural engineer, one of the challenges with cross-laminated timber is it's very light, can therefore be very responsive, and it therefore can be very bouncy. So as designers, we always look at the vibration criteria of a floor plate, for example, and what is suitable in different scenarios, so that if you're sitting in an office trying to work at your desk and someone walks past in the corridor or is running to a meeting, your screen doesn't start bouncing up and down and actually you get a bit dizzy and feel a bit sick. But in terms of what is codified, which is what we work to as engineers, there wasn't anything codified around timber structures in a gym environment. So we're starting to look at, okay, what are the impacts when people are doing aerobics? What are the impacts when people are doing a box jump or dropping a dumbbell? And so all of these more unique scenarios that weren't codified, we needed to consider because, for example, in the adjacent room in this health and fitness centre, there's a physio, with someone on a massage table, potentially getting acupuncture, and we don't want that to go wrong. So yeah, that was a really, really interesting challenge. We're lucky in Arup that we have super smart technical experts in most things. So I worked with a guy called Rob Harrison in Manchester, who is, a vibration and response expert. And we went to site, we jumped up and down, we tested the response and made sure it matched our analysis model that was all built from first principles. So it was a really innovative project in that sense, that we were designing something and we were confident in our analysis approach, but fundamentally it had never been tested in real life. So we went to do that and verified what we'd done, and it was a success. That's the thing with more innovative materials, I guess, that there sometimes is that challenge of having to go back to first principles because there isn't the precedent.
Yeah.
There isn't necessarily the code or the methodology. But that was one that I really loved working on.
That's really exciting. I really like what you said there about there wasn't a precedent. And I think that's the exciting thing about being involved in sustainability, is that this could be the first time that this has ever been tried or tested, and it is up to going back to first principles and testing that out. So it's not something where you can't make your mark and you can't actually change things for the better and explore and kind of be playful in terms of what's possible and what's not possible, really. So I really like that. And also, can imagine everyone going to site and jumping up and down to
Yeah.
test things out.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
quite cool.
That was me. No, that was a good project. It's a good client, I think. You can't say a client is good and a client is bad, but it's a client that has trust in their design team. They know they've appointed the right people with the right expertise, and they're willing to be guided by that rather than have any nervousness around, well, it's not what we did last time, so why don't I just do what we did last time? And the benefits of that came out instantly because the construction, I mean, it was only 2 stories, but the construction of that timber frame, because it is, it's a mass timber solution. I think it was under a month, and they've got the full structural frames. All of those supplementary benefits were a real bonus for the client, and one of the reasons that we put forward timber in the first place, to meet the FAST program.
Is there any other projects that stand out for you?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I've been privileged to work on a lot of different projects. One that I worked on in its really early stage, so what we would call Reba Design Stage 2, is now the Hoxton Hotel in Southwark in London. And that was an existing site, and we actually looked really hard at foundation reuse. So there was already piles in the ground there. And so again, I guess it's along a similar vein where that investment up front in that thinking time meant you could unlock potentially some reductions in embodied carbon by not having to obviously install a whole new raft of piles. But that was a really great project because you needed to work with the experts. You needed to work with the geotechnical team. You needed to work with the historic structures team. You needed to understand codes of the time and what concrete grades might look like and what strength that would mean in today's terms. I really like working on projects where it is a true collaboration, and you need to draw on everybody's.
I think it's one of them. Just be curious as well. Just be
Yeah,
curious about it, because that's the way that you're going to learn, is just ask the experts the questions and just be curious about how everything works, really.
definitely.
I know I've been to again the engineers reuse, but they were talking about foundation design and how that can be sustainable. So it's not always the above ground stuff that you can implement sustainability on. It is some of the civils and below ground and foundation stuff as well that can be
It
also
is,
equally as important.
and even more so, to be honest, Dom, if it's a commercial office with a basement, that's where the carbon is, undoubtedly.
True.
Um,
Yeah.
So anything you can do to be more efficient in what you do in the ground is hugely impactful on embodied carbon. And often it can be the stuff that needs more thinking time, right? We're dealing with ground profiles that are slightly unknown. We need to do a little bit of investigation. We need to see what's worked on adjacent sites or what exists in the ground. Are we going across any tube lines? It is always a little bit more tricky, but investing in that time up front can pay back huge dividends in terms of material saving and therefore embodied carbon saving.
Yeah, definitely. I was keen to just get your take as well on how the industry, how the policy has kind of evolved throughout the years as well, and what are maybe some of the milestones or the key changes that you have seen since you've kind of been involved in sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, in, I guess, maybe, let's say the past 5 years, the change is huge. And it's quite staggering, actually, if you look back, which people rarely do. But, there is a focus now at intergovernmental and international government policy level on buildings. That's significant in itself. Buildings are tricky at governmental level because there very, very rarely is a minister for buildings. It's the intersection between the Minister for Energy, Minister for Infrastructure. We've got health, education, housing. You've then got, the local government level, where you've got the intersection of city mayors and regional governments, etc., all with their own leadership. So there isn't that single point of focus like there is with some of, say, the work on the energy transition around EVs, for example. So that makes it really complicated, and it doesn't give it that laser focus that it sometimes needs. But all of that being said, there is huge progress. So buildings and the built environment are now mentioned in the COP negotiated texts at the UN. That's only happened in the past 3 to 4 years. There is a intergovernmental council on buildings now, which have positioned themselves around a buildings breakthrough and are putting forward plans and real credible actions that as countries they will take to shift towards low carbon and resilient buildings. These are all things that have only existed in the past 3 to 4 years and are still gaining pace. At a UK scale, the way that legislation is moving is really, really rapid when it comes to particularly whole life carbon. For example, in London, you can't now get planning through the London Plan without doing a whole life carbon assessment. That's a huge lever to drive change. Yes, some clients and some proposals and design teams, etc., were already doing that because it was important to them and it was a key driver for the project. But now it's in the policy, and that makes a difference. It helps scale the kind of impact and the way that people need to work. And then you've got, superb organizations from institutions. So I'm a member of the Institute of Structural Engineers. If you picked up a structural engineer magazine, which we get monthly, 10 years ago, I'd be surprised if there was a mention of carbon. It is front and center now as part of our responsibility as engineers. And there's some fantastic research being done by structural engineers that the Institute are able to promote and demonstrate as best practice. And then aside from our institutions, which are obviously technical discipline specific, you've got these great sector bodies. For example, the UK GBC, which is the UK Green Building Council. Their roadmap that was produced to say what the UK sector needed to do towards a net zero built environment, that was really, really impactful and gave obvious entry points for whether you're a policymaker, whether you're a client, whether you're a designer. What do you need to do to drive and support this transition? And it is quite staggering, actually, if you reflect on the last 5 years, how much things have moved forward. The key now is getting credibility in all of the assessments that are taking place so that we're comparing like for like. There are very, very few net zero carbon buildings in the UK. There are more than that are saying they are net zero carbon buildings in the UK. So we need to get that kind of baseline accepted universally so that we eliminate the opportunity for greenwashing, and we make sure that, everyone is upskilled to the same level. It's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I remember kind of almost 20 years ago now when it was in construction, greenwashing was kind of a thing to be watching out for. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's having almost like a standardized set of rules that need to be adhered to. Do you think it's a case of, because it's so early in the process, some of these things can be missed or kind of played about with in order to be able to promote that you have done net zero when you haven't? Or what do you think is the kind of the cause and the solution there, really?
I mean, I'm no expert on greenwashing and how we step away from that. I would give probably a lot of practitioners the benefit of the doubt that the standard and the methodology, hasn't been there or has been evolving so fast and still is that, you've got to be really, really on your progress updates to know what is the latest. And so I think people are probably doing their best. Nobody, certainly, nobody in Arup, and I doubt nobody is out there trying to make bad decisions on a project, right? So I think probably people are trying to do their best with the knowledge they have available. The key is making sure that as we move forward, the knowledge that they have available is more robust, has credibility at its heart, is common across disciplines and across parts of the UK and more globally, and gives you that baseline where everybody is kind of speaking the same language. So we are comparing like for like. But yeah, I think it's so important that that kind of how we measure and that part on data, that gap is plugged. Arup have actually just announced a partnership with Autodesk. So
Hmm.
obviously where a lot of work in our sector is carried out on Revit to support that standardization of how we measure
Okay.
the carbon, which would be just a game changer, really, in terms of leveling the playing field and making sure that data is credible, which supports everyone, supports the engineers, but it also supports the contractors who have to pick up this thing and get it through to being built. So
It's
yeah, that's
amazing.
quite exciting.
It's amazing, and I think, just to kind of close things off, I think it's everyone's responsibility from bottom up, top down. It's everyone that can get involved in the sustainability agenda, and I don't think it's a case of, let's say, for someone who's just come out of university, that's entry level, it's not a case of they can't have an impact. It's a case of always just be having those discussions. I think that's the most important thing, is just always have it. Just talk. Just
Yeah,
talk, have the discussions, and always be constantly learning and
yeah,
trying to
I
challenge and
agree.
evolve.
Definitely. The great thing about my sort of dipping my toe and then moving into this kind of sustainability world is that there is no gatekeeping, right? Everybody in the climate movement, from an activist to a CEO, is pleased to have you on board. No one's saying, you weren't caring about sustainability 5 years ago. Everyone's just saying, we're so pleased you're caring about sustainability. Let's come up with some cool ideas. So, fresh out of university or fresh out of an apprenticeship, or even during those like early stages of learning, that's the time to get excited about things and be curious and ask the question, why was this designed this way? Did you think about carbon, or was that not a driver? Or, you know, no one's gonna not want to talk about those things, I think, today, which is the real change probably from when I first started as an engineer.
Awesome. Well, Bex, it's been an absolute privilege to talk to you. It's been fascinating and certainly eye-opening for me as well. So, yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me.
No problem.